So today is August the 16th, and we are just so excited to welcome each and every one of you. My name is Jyoti Ma, and I'm the founder of the Fountain and a co-founder for the Center for Sacred Studies and a member of the Mother Earth Delegation of United Original Nations, all of which have a voice in what you're about to receive today. Our elders have been instructing us as we take each and every one of our steps. Spirit and the ancestors have been flowing things in so that this offering to you can come to you in a way that's honoring our new models, which is restoring and returning us to an original model of economy and how to create this bridge so we can all walk out of a colonized way of thinking and being and cross over that bridge into nature's world, mother's law, and the instruction of our original people. So that's what we're excited about. And I can see by the number that's responded to this, you all have a calling and you've heard something in this as we made this offering to you. We would like to start off with a prayer, and then I'm going to pass it to Alexis and Ra, who are going to be sharing with you a little more about how this came to be, and let you jump into some of the training so you'll get a feeling for what is possible for you, your companies, your communities, your mission, your movements, however this personally can walk itself across that bridge, because Mother Earth is shouting at us through climate change in these last months. She's getting louder and louder with that shout. So thank you for your passion, your hearts, your commitment to Mother Earth herself and the moment of change we're in. With that, if you'll just take a moment and sit down in that sacred place in the middle of yourself, where you and your prana, the divine that lives within you, your own presence resides, so that we can all connect there first as we begin to open this new doorway. This is Jyoti Ma, and I'm sitting here, creator on the sacred territory of the Miwok and of the coastal Miwok and the Pomo peoples of this land, their sacred territories, the original caretakers. And through them, I would like to connect in my prayer to all of the caretakers around this planet and all the sacred territories that hold this creation we call our reality, our life. We are in such a big moment, Creator, like never before. The prophecies of the people have helped us prepare for this moment, and they are now instructing us with how to walk through this moment. What the Mother Earth herself is asking from us so that we can assist her in this process of transformation and ascension, so that we can step into what the prophecies call the new dawn, awaken ourselves and walking with those original principles of heart and unity, collaboration, reciprocity, compassion, tolerance, and all life is sacred. Let it be that way. Such a big moment of transition, such a big moment of the turning times, as all the paths around this planet have spoken about for so very, very long. And here we are now in it. Help us have courage so that we can stand tall in it. Help us plant ourselves firmly with the understanding of what Mother Earth herself is needing. Help us return to that relationship with her so that we can hear that dialogue and be present for the instructions she will individually give each and every one of us to help us with our own lives and with our families and with our communities and with the work that we've come to do. Thank you, Creator, for holding us like that, for knowing who we are and shouting so loudly that we could no longer not answer your call, that we must now stand together united in this purpose for all nations to move forward, for us to bring peace on this earth once again, that we can come back to the natural order of life and how we care for life, that brings a way of life that helps us sustain and maintain balance in this life. Well, thank you, Creator, for waking us to this kind of moment we're in. Thank you for the good things that have brought this moment to be. Thank you for the offerings that we've put out as we've reached today. And we listened to the feedback. We listened so that we could craft into this presentation today and into this training package that's flowing forward all that people are needing out there in order for them to accomplish this task of crossing the bridge and restoring ourselves to a way of life that honors all life is sacred. Thank you, Creator, for all those that have gathered here, for the open hearts that are deeply listening to the humility and the strength of character and courage that it has taken to just come and sit at a table like this in a moment of such great change. This grandmother is humbly thankful and grateful for community itself, for there is this new global community just beginning to seed itself in this moment today. And for that, I am celebrating. Please listen to each and every heart that's gathered here as they listen to your heart. Please lift off their hearts anything that might be heavy on them so their hearts can pop wide open and the intelligence of love that lives there can light our way. This is my prayer. This is my prayer. This is my prayer. So be it. Alexis, I'm going to pass this now to you and sit back and deeply listen.
Well, thank you so much, first of all, for such a beautiful prayer. And I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm zooming in from Delray Oaks, California, which is a tiny little community next to Monterey, California. And I'm really happy to be here with all of you today. I come from Bristol Bay, Alaska. Two ancestors from two places, Attu Island and up the Kuskokwim River at a village that's no longer there. And also for my Swedish friends on the call, also Swedish American. And I will get more into introductions later, but I would like to talk about how this all came apart together, not apart. Freudian slip. We met at a conference in London in 2019 that was inspired by a program I put on called the Indigenous Forum at the Pioneers Conference. And a number of wonderful organizers really wanted to bring a lot of Indigenous thought leaders, especially in the area of using our traditional values and knowledge to protect the planet, protect Mother Earth. And at that event, there was a call to bring us all together through a delegation that became the Mother Earth delegation. And I imagine some of you have been on some of those Zooms. And what I really love about it is this combination of practicality, but also the spiritual connection to the earth that all of us can have. And so as far as allyship goes and organizational decolonization, I've worked for tribes and tribal organizations pretty much my entire adult life, and especially in the conservation sector and protecting our planet. What I would notice is these non-Indigenous, non-tribal run groups and individuals would try to collaborate with us or work with us, but they made every mistake possible and alienated themselves. So a number of years back, I decided that I wanted to start working out this material to figure out ways that everybody, no matter where we come from or what our background is, that we can work together and come to understand each other across different mindsets, worldviews, the way we were raised, really to build peace and work together to address these problems. So that's my little contribution to all of this work. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Ra.
Thank you, Alexis. Thank you, Jyoti, as well, for that beautiful prayer. I am calling in from Cairo today. I can literally see the pyramids from the balcony. So I feel really blessed right now, and also in this beautiful place on the earth to be taking this call from right now. I go by Ra. My birth name is Ryan. I dropped the yes and the no. Figured that would help out in equanimity, which is really important in these times, to not create more binaries and create more polarization. And my lineage is German, Ashkenazi Jewish, and Irish, and I'm a dual citizen of Ireland and the United States. And yeah, I was connected with the fountain earlier this year. We went to Kauai to engage in something called the Creators Lab. And many months later, this is what has emerged from the Creators Lab, is this beautiful synchronistic dual offering that Alexis and I and the fountain have co-crafted and will be co-guiding together. And my contribution is what I would call helping to evolve the consciousness of business through decompartmentalizing and eroding the binaries between us and nature, which also is part of the re-indigenization work that Alexis does, is that understanding that there can be no systems change without human behavioral change. There can be no impactful and authentic means to shift the narrative and the methodologies that we go about creating our solutions if they're being manifested from the same place that created the problem. So Einstein has that quote that a lot of people are very familiar with, which is, you cannot solve a problem from the same level of consciousness that created it. Yeah, it takes a little bit of understanding of Einstein's work to understand that he wasn't talking about the intellectual mind, because in many of his other ways of speaking, he said, I did not come about my realizations of the universe through the intellect. So a lot of this journey is going to be moving into what we call embodied cognition, which is what the re-indigenization journey is about, is how do we not only talk about and understand these ways, but live these ways and live them to such a degree that we become the new system and the new economics that we're looking to create. Some of which, and many of which, have already been existing on this planet, as we'll learn, for tens of thousands, if not longer, years. Post-capitalist doesn't mean temporally new in a future state, because a lot of these ways have existed for a very long time. So that's a little bit about me. I'm going to hand it back to Alexis, and we're going to jump right in. So really happy that everyone's here and interested in these sort of things, because it's a pretty pivotal point in time. So mahalo for that.
Rob, before you go and we jump into that, could you just for a moment touch on the options? Because I think we've tried to put together a package that allows everybody to join where they can and where they feel they're being called to. And so you've got it lined up so that they can just be with you in Rob Biz and some of what that presents. And then they can go to Alexis, or they can just study with Alexis, or they can do the full program of both. And we've done a sliding scale, I think, that allows for the inclusivity of all of this as we're trying to model in this training, even in the form that we're giving it, this new economic model that's all inclusive.
Yeah, thanks for that nudge, Jyoti. So what she was getting to is that essentially the offering for the fundraiser with the fountain is structured in there. It looks like 3 options, but it's really kind of 2. I guess you can consider it 3. The first one is the offering of Re-Biz. So this is oriented at reconnecting business with Earth and redesigning business as usual. This is a month-long journey. The first 2 weeks are centered on an internal worldview transformation and disciplinary, cross-cultural understandings involving grief, involving language, involving empathy, involving dominant hegemonic worldview. And then it morphs into a systems change perspective with regenerative frameworks, systemic structural incentives, degrowth and post-growth economics, and the like. So it kind of weaves us through a reorientation of our lens to then approach emergent ways of implementing systems change. So that's the first offering, or the first option. This is also a beautiful primer and segue into Alexis's Re-Indigenization and Allyship offering, which is a 2-month journey, which she'll dive into more with us today about. So the third option, so those are the first two, is the allyship and the rebiz. And the third one is compounding them both into a 3-month journey where people can go through both of the offerings and learn like that. So this entire, I don't know if smorgasbord is a Swedish word, but it's probably not the right word. Probably not the right word for what I'm trying to say. But the entire package itself is what we're offering, as well as these individual offerings. But the entire package itself will definitely be the most impactful. And this is where we're allowing people to come in at whatever access point they're able to. So the way that we've defined this in a term is geopolitical access and context. So what we mean by geopolitical access and context is that currently, in the way that the systems are structured, the majority of the resources to developed nations come from the global south. Yet a lot of the wealth disparity, inequality, and various other disequilibrium that exists in those places prevents sometimes those people from accessing things that we can access in the global north. So we've basically tiered the pricing structure so that people can meet us in a variety of different places, from a tier 1 global north investment for the entire package or the individual options, all the way to a global south, or those who have less access and entangled privilege within these structures. So people can invest where they can. All of the money is tax deductible and goes to the fountain as a foundation to continue to support their work in the world. And yeah, and we also hope to be able to allow people to come in on scholarship as well, depending on the different levels that people are able to invest in, because we don't want to commodify or oppress or gated community off the knowledge and wisdom that is here based on price points in the world, which far too often happens. So I hope that made sense with what you wanted me to touch upon, Jyoti.
It did. Thank you. That it's sliding scale. So you just have to see, and this is about you being truthful with yourself as you make the reciprocity. Where do you sit inside of that so that you could join? As some of you may be here representing companies, you may want some of your main staff to jump in here. And later, if you're wanting and needing, we will also be designing how we can come in and help you apply that on a larger scale throughout your culture inside your company or your movement or your organization. So that's the span of it. With that said, now, Alexis, you can share a little more about what those 2 months look like with you.
Oh, well, I can give a little header now, but I was going to end on that. So I think I'll wait on that, but yeah, I think I'll wait. So stick with me to the end. But essentially today is just kind of a quick overview of what allyship with Indigenous peoples is. It's going to be a lot of material in a short amount of time, but it's just to kind of dip your toe in the water, whereas the longer journey will really cover a lot more material more deeply. And I have a colleague I've been working with on this, and she came up with a great metaphor for unlearning the toxic things that we've learned that destroy people and planet, and relearning some of these lessons. And the metaphor she uses is physical therapy. So if you're hurting, and the doctor tells you to go to physical therapy, your muscles don't automatically align and get fixed after you show up one time and do the exercises. You have to repeat it and repeat it and repeat it until you have muscle memory and everything goes back to the way it should be. So I think that's kind of a fun metaphor for thinking about a longer learning journey as opposed to a one-off. And now, we did not warn you of this, but I would like to make this a little bit interactive. So if you have your cell phones handy, I'd like you to take a picture of this Q code, or if you're just on your computer and you don't have your cell phone handy, go to the link at the top, menti.com, and jot down the code or type in the code when they prompt you for it, 8380261. And I'm just going to hang out for a minute. And when you all get in the Menti, I'm going to expand my screen so I can see all of you. Give me a thumbs up that you're ready. And now, if you are not equipped to do this at all right now, then I will suggest in the interactive parts that you just go in the chat. And you'll see how cool Mentimeter is if you haven't used it before. It's a way for all of us to see what everybody else is kind of thinking. So I see 10 thumbs up. I'm just wondering if a couple people need more time. Oh, okay. I'm seeing some visual thumbs up. Perfect. I'll give like 30 more seconds and then I'm going to move on. While I'm waiting, I'll just tell you something fun. I had to move out of my house because it's torn up right now. And the place I'm renting, the owners have 2 halflingers, which are small draft horses, and they're leaving town. And I'm super excited to take care of them and hang out with horses. So I'm going to move on now. So the goals for today are, I'm just going to read them. To develop the confidence to be a more aware, sensitive, respectful, reciprocal ally and relative. To be aware of your subconscious biases so that your good intentions translate into authentic allyship. And I'm going to give you some practical ideas and skills for entering meaningful and reciprocal allyships, whether they come to you or whether it's something you're trying to initiate. And this is what I'm going to cover in the next little bit over an hour. Just defining what an ally is. What is a brave space and why do we need it to be an ally? We'll talk a little bit about implicit bias, some strategies for being an ally with Indigenous peoples. And I've got that sprinkled throughout. It's not just in that order. What is a discomfort plan for when things go wrong? And then hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A. And if you want to stay on a little bit later, that's okay. All right, just checking the chat here. Yes. Ra, thank you so much for being there in the chat to answer questions, because it's hard for me to look at it when I'm presenting. So if you don't mind continuing to do that, that would be great.
You got it.
So I would like to have people introduce yourself in the chat. Speaking of chat, what is your name, pronoun, and where are you zooming in from? I'm super excited to see where people are zooming in from. Start. Very cool. We have some coming in. Oh, hi, Loretta. Christian. It's so cool to see everybody coming from so many different places. I was kind of excited to see that today. And I guess
Wow.
we should, yeah.
Mexico and Egypt
Yeah.
and England and France and New York and Germany and the big islands. Oh, blessings to Hawaii right now. We're sending our love and prayers. Sweden, New York again, Texas, up north California, Georgia. No, yeah. Oh, wow. Wonderful, wonderful collection of people. Welcome, welcome.
Yes, definitely. This also gets me to my disclaimer, which is that I can only speak from my own perspective. I only speak for myself. I don't speak for other Native peoples. And also, my perspective was formed in the United States. So if you are coming from Europe, I know that you have a little bit different of a perspective and understanding. So just keep in mind that this is really from the perspective of the United States, but it will still be helpful. Iceland. That's on my dream bucket list to go to. So, so allyship. We really define it as being a good relative. So again, I can't speak for all Indigenous peoples, but a concept that's kind of a universal among Indigenous peoples is this idea that we are related to everything, not just, hang on, my dog wants out. Can you let him out, please? Thank you. So it's the idea that we are not only related to each other, but we are relatives with four-leggeds, two-leggeds, plants, animals, even rocks or features of the environment. And so when I think about allyship, we like to think about it in terms of our relations to each other as relatives, and not just trying, and relatives as relatives, we care about each other, we love each other, we tend to each other. So it's not just a transactional thing. If you're working together on a project or coming together to solve something, it's really, how would you do it as family? So some basic definitions of an ally is, it's thought of as members of the advantaged group who help activists break down oppression and build empowerment, and not just activists, but people who are trying to change something for the better. It means recognizing your privileges and expressing solidarity with groups that are marginalized or oppressed. And a lot of people have different ideas about what that entails, this idea of expressing solidarity. Everybody has a different opinion, but mine is that there's kind of a continuum of it, and every little bit of help, every little bit thing you do helps. There is a term called accomplices that you may have heard of. Some people reject allyship and say you should be an accomplice. And the way I think of as an accomplice is like, but are you willing to go to jail for this? Are you willing to lay down in front of the logging truck about to cut down old growth forest? I think all of it is important. And as far as allyship goes, even the first thing, just coming here to listen and learn, is an act of solidarity. And at the far end of the continuum, donating money, that's an act of solidarity. Telling your friends about it is an act of solidarity. Voting a certain way, to the very end of the continuum, laying down in front of the logging truck. So it means focusing more on dismantling structures that oppress groups. So oftentimes people who are trying to work with Indigenous peoples or groups, they come in and try and dictate how things can get better, but really it's about that second part of this phrase, trusting the wisdom and following the leadership of the group. And we can't just, the first part of it, we can't just address the symptoms of the disease. We have to address the root cause of the disease. So it's kind of like what Ra was talking about with structures to transform capitalism into something that is less of an endemic disease, like a disease on our planet. So a few examples, and it's kind of funny because I used to work for a think tank in strategic communications, and I always told my clients, never make a listicle, these bullets going down, but I find them very effective sometimes. So you're going to see a few listicles. So one example is make lasting relationships. That's related to this relative mindset. Don't just pop in and pop out. You really have to have a commitment to be there and to make these relationships for years. I know one of the things that I encountered, I used to run programming at the Alaska Native Heritage Center in Anchorage, and Every now and then, anthropologists would come in and they would want to learn something, and basically just this extractive capitalistic attitude. They'd want to learn something, they'd want to extract our knowledge, and then they would never come back and share it. It was like a one-time transaction and you'd never see them. But when I got a PhD in anthropology, the same people I worked with 20 something years ago, we're still friends. We still hang out. In fact, I saw a bunch of them a couple months ago. So it's about that lasting lifetime relationship is relative. One thing, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, there's a number of instances where they talk about free, prior, and informed consent with Indigenous peoples, because our resources, families, everything's been exploited without our knowledge or consent for so many hundreds of years. It's really important to get the consent of the peoples, whatever thing that you're working with. Another thing, if you have a business, it's a really good policy to have more than 50% of your board of directors be people of color. That's what POC stands for. Ideally, if your company is working in communities with Indigenous peoples, try and get your board to be up to 50% of that community, of that area, because they will know how to steer things in a way that an outsider or a newcomer won't. If you are hiring Indigenous peoples on your staff, you don't want just one token person, because that will create a power dynamic where the Indigenous or person of color staff member is not going to feel comfortable speaking up for themselves if it goes against the grain of dominant thinking. But if you have 2 or 3 or 4, then their voice can be stronger and the organization will be better for it, because the more of a diversity of worldviews you have, the more fresh ideas and solutions to problems that you wouldn't normally think of being raised in the kind of dominant society you'll have, which will make it more successful, really, whatever the goal is. Also, not speaking for others. You'd be surprised, maybe you wouldn't be surprised, but a lot of people working in or with Indigenous communities, they come back to where they normally live and they just speak for them as if they can. In fact, when we were at that conference where we met in 2019, there was a newly minted PhD anthropologist there who was working with an Indigenous group in South America, and a couple members of that Indigenous group were there, and she did a book reading on her book about that community, and the Indigenous people from that community were sitting there in the room. It was literally the most egregious thing I've ever seen. Very arrogant. Ask for help without overtaxing leaders. What that means is, if you don't know how to work with the community, just ask how, ask them. However, the people in Indigenous Native communities, those that are willing to speak out and help and extend an arm to others, they're often the people that do everything in their communities. So you want to be strategic about asking. You don't want to overburden them, because they're often very, very, very busy. And also that gets to compensating Indigenous leaders for their time. Like I said, those leaders are the people that do everything in their communities, and they might be so busy they don't have time for a 9-to-5 job. So I always try to compensate people fairly. And the way I think about it is, if you're an elder or a culture bearer, you have knowledge that's very, very specific and takes years, decades to learn. Compare that to a doctor, a physician in the US. They do their residency, they go to medical school, they go to college, probably takes 10 or 12 years. They get paid, or a lawyer even, they get paid $500, $600, $700 an hour. And that knowledge isn't even so specialized as what Native culture bearers have. So the rate I try to always fundraise for is somewhere around like $500 an hour. because they deserve compensation for that deep knowledge and taking time away from their communities to do other things. And then also admit when we don't know what we're doing. We have to be humble in this work of allyship. And the next key to allyship is this idea of making a brave space. So there's a concept, I don't know if it extends beyond the US, called making a safe space when you're speaking across class and racial divides, power divides. And it's this idea that everybody can talk because it's a safe space. But safe spaces aren't actually safe for marginalized people, because what it turns into is watching what you say and not being truthful and honest about your feelings, so that the basically the white people in the room don't feel offended, because that will break down the conversation. It's what's called white fragility. Robin DiAngelo wrote a really good book about it called White Fragility. I recommend it. So a brave space is this idea that everybody goes into the space across these social divides and are willing to be brave and tackle difficult subjects and admit truths that exist about us. So I'm going to go into an exercise here on Mentimeter about making a brave space. But before we do that, it's one of the brave things that we have to do in making these spaces, listening, being humble, but it means we have to acknowledge supremacist hierarchies. So in the United States, it's a white supremacy nation. All of our social structures are designed to uplift white people, basically. And so in the US, we have to admit that race is a social construct. People make it up. It's not biological, but it is a real lived experience. So that makes it real. Whites have privilege. It's important to understand internalized dominance and oppression. So that's the idea. If you are on top of the social hierarchy, that you don't realize that you're on top of the social hierarchies, that you don't understand the privileges that you have and compared to other people. And then internalized oppression. If you are a part of a marginalized community, that you internalize that marginalization and the oppression. So one example of that is among Native folks, at least in Alaska, is this idea that you're lesser than non-natives, that it's this low self-esteem that's internalized without actually understanding that it comes from centuries of settler colonization that were meant to make us feel that way. So that's internalized oppression. And then also that race is not the same as Indigenous identity. So, you could be Indigenous and you could be white. You could be Indigenous and you could be Black. You could be Indigenous and you could be brown. Any of those things don't take away your Indigenous identity. In the US, at least, Native identity is, if you are connected to your tribe, they know you're a part of it. But the caveat is, because of settler colonization and forced removal of Native peoples from ancestral homelands, we have actually the most Native people in the US live in cities more than on reservations in rural areas because of this forced relocation. So now we do have a lot of Native people in the cities they're still Indigenous. They have an urban Native community, but their tribes back home may not know them because of that. So I also want to point out that I say here, in the title, acknowledging supremacist hierarchies, because I knew there would be some people joining us from around the world where race is not enacted the way it is in the US, but there are still supremacist hierarchies where people oppress others. So now I want to do a reflection. Whoops. Yes. So let's do a brave space reflection. So if you're white or white passing, what are some of the privileges you have received? You also could have privilege if you're not white or white passing. So for example, some of the privileges you've received, I'll go first. When I was in my early 20s, I was in Alaska, I won't say where, and I went out, I went out with some of my friends. There was a club and a bar, and I got pretty tipsy, and I started walking home, and I got pulled over. Me and my friend got pulled over by a police officer, and they were like, "You're not allowed to be publicly drunk." Da 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 da. And so I said, "But I'm just walking home." And I, normally they're supposed to arrest you for public drunkenness. But I just said, "Can you give me a ride home so I can get there faster?" And I got a ride. But that wouldn't, if I looked differently, I would have been treated very differently. So that's a white privilege for me. And now, not white or white passing, some other privileges you may have. I saw a really good talk by Patrice Cullors with the Black Lives Matter movement. And she was talking about how even as a Black woman living in the US, she has the privilege of a home that's stable. And she was thinking about that in terms of refugees. So I'd like you to take 2 or 3 minutes just to reflect on some of the privileges you may have. I think that's probably enough time for reflection. And so I'm not going to ask you to share those privileges because it can trigger people sometimes. So what I would like to do though is ask you in the Mentimeter or the chat, if you didn't get on Mentimeter, what came up with you doing that reflection? And again, if you're on the desktop, just join at menti.com and use the code. Yeah, we have some responses here in the chat. Oh, Frank, I have a whole 2-hour lecture rant on universities as a colonizing institution.
To hear it. Can I speak to this? You know, what I just wrote down, or you want to wait?
The reason I'm using Mentimeter, not to be disrespectful, is because when we do open chat in a Zoom, we honestly, we just lose track of time and it won't get to all the material.
Okay,
Happy to, if you jot it down, I'm happy to stay on a little bit later if I can, to stay with the group.
And we're going to have a question and answer period after those for those that can stay on longer. And this would be a good place for some of that to open. Yeah.
Yeah. We're seeing some more come in through the Menti. I'll give it like 30 more seconds before moving on. These are really great comments in the Menti and the chat.
Can you read those out loud so we can be sure to see or hear them?
Are there folks who can't see it? The only reason is because I'm just keeping a track on time. And there's a lot of responses. The more are coming in the chat. Okay, I'm going to move on, and I can also export these responses to share with the group later. So the reason that we want to really look at our privileges is how it's related to settler colonization and colonization in general. Because in order to settle the US, obviously you have to take other people's land. To take the land, you basically have to kill them, the American genocide, extract resources, continue to make people feel lesser than, so that that system of domination can be maintained. And I'm just finishing up a 7-year longitudinal study with Native college going youth and looking at some of the obstacles that they face. And that led me to come up with to basically, I call it the 7 dimensions of intergenerational trauma from that. And these include these facets: forced relocation, major disability, chronic disease, substance abuse or addiction, history of forced boarding school, mental illness, religious conversion, physical, social, or verbal abuse. These are very common among more than 2/3 of the youth. Well, all the youth had at least 4 of these out of the 7, and about 2/3, a half to 2/3 experienced every single one of these dimensions. And now imagine, how are you going to try to better yourself and go to college and get an education so that you can make money and survive if you're dealing with all of these difficult facets of intergenerational trauma? And so I asked them in the survey, and then I follow up with an interview, which of these have you or a close family member experienced? So by close family member, I define it in the way that we do in our Native communities. For example, in a lot of the clan and social systems, somebody who is your maternal cousin, that would be like a sister, or somebody who lives with you, maybe grandparents. So your family, basically, that you interact with all the time. Check off the box if you are a close family member has this. And for myself, I have all 7. I can talk about that later, but this is just a quick introduction. So, but how can you think about how to be an ally when the people you are working with or want to work with have been traumatized so badly. So we really need to face these issues and figure out how to heal together. And it also requires healing yourself, going into your ancestry, understanding how your ancestors may have also been traumatized by things in history or may have done the oppressing. When I started going back to Sweden, I learned, I understood where white guilt came from because my Swedish family really oppressed people for like 1,000 years. So, like I said, we've had a United States, we've had a genocide in order to settle or colonize. And when people first learn about the truth of history, they often, they cry, they get really sad. The first step is to not deny it. And this is 7 stages of understanding genocide put out by the UN, just to not even face it or admit that it happened. Then when you begin to understand what happens, you might get angry about it, obviously depressed. Sometimes I think the depression comes before the anger, actually. I did a training with a large organization here, and I had a guest speaker explaining about the 3 waves of colonization and genocide in California. And a bunch of people started crying, and then they were mad at me because they had to go back to the office right afterwards. But then they began to accept it, and they thought it through in a talking circle. And a lot of the folks realized, they had an aha moment. They were mad at me for making them depressed and then having to go back to work. But then they realized that myself and a lot of other people have to grapple with this every day in the background, whether we're at work or not. It's not a one-time thing. And then we go into acceptance. And then where this often goes in terms of understanding genocide is guilt. Like, did my ancestors do this? Oh, this is horrible. I went through that myself, trying to understand my Swedish ancestry. But guilt is not a place from which to make the world better, come to terms with other people, make relationships, and be a good ally. Really, we need to transform that guilt into responsibility. So one of the ways that I think about it is, I live here now in Monterey, California. So I feel responsible to this ecosystem and this environment. I do little things like try to encourage people to regrow native plants for the environment. Try to work with folks to protect the wildlife near me. Try to support some of the goals of the tribes here, because I live here, so that's my responsibility now, in addition to my responsibilities back up north. So now I want to move into talking about implicit bias a little bit. So implicit bias is beliefs and worldviews that affect our understanding, attitudes, and actions in an unconscious manner. So I love this cartoon because it's a really great example of implicit bias. So that's an excellent suggestion, Miss Triggs. Perhaps one of the men here would like to make it. And it reminds me of a story from when I was in graduate school. There was a student club that was trying to raise money, so they decided to make t-shirts. And one of the guys, like the president of the club, when they were getting ready to order it, he goes, so what should we order? Should we order like 20 regular t-shirts and like 15 women's? Which is the implicit bias that regular is a man and that women is the irregular thing. So I want to give a couple other examples of implicit bias here. One is, so I used to have 4 dogs, now I have 3. And I used to walk them in a very expensive part of town. And I would often get stopped by random people asking if they could have my card for dog walking. They just assumed I was a dog walker, but I don't think they ever assumed that I was a consultant or a professor or worked for a think tank or had higher degrees than them. That wouldn't even cross their mind. That's kind of a marginal example, but another one that's even more salient is my husband is Persian, and he teaches for the Department of Defense at the Naval Postgraduate School. And every time he meets new people, whether it's on the street or on a plane or at an event, we're in America, so we always care about what people do more than who they are. So people always say, "What do you do?" And he says, "Oh, I teach at the Naval Postgraduate School." And they go, "Oh, you teach at DLI, which is the Defense Language Institute across town," because they assume that because he's Persian, the only thing he's good to teach at that level is the Persian language, as opposed to all these complex subjects he teaches. It's a really strong example of implicit bias. So I made this, I don't know if it's fun, this interesting slide from real life examples that I've heard many, many times. And it's like a countdown, like on a late night show, 10 whitest things you can say to a native. So these all belie different types of implicit biases. So one is using the wrong label, calling people the colonized name. Some peoples do say that. In Inupiaq territory, way up north of Alaska, people say Eskimo, no problem. In Southwest Alaska, where I'm from, that's very, very offensive. So you need to ask people what they go by and figure out what the right label is. People saying my grandmother was a Cherokee princess, like Elizabeth Warren. I've heard that so many times. I think it's starting to go away in the culture. People are realizing it's offensive, but it basically says you're equivalent to an Indigenous person. First of all, there were no princesses. Second of all, you're not equivalent to it because it's some family myth or story that you're disconnected to. And third of all, if you're so disconnected to it, you wouldn't know what it feels like to grow up Native and to deal with those 7 dimensions of intergenerational trauma. So another one is your cultures / traditions are so ancient. That is the stereotype that Native peoples are stuck in time, stuck in the past, and that our cultures don't continue to be vibrant and thriving and changing all the time. But you don't have black hair, high cheekbones, dark eyes, etc. That one's obvious, that you're assuming there's a specific look. I'd like to have ceremony as part of the event. There are ways in which this works and ways in which it doesn't, but generally you're not going to experience a real genuine ceremony unless you put the work in as part of it. That's also related to tokenization. If you have an event and you bring in an Indigenous leader just to do the opening prayer, and you don't ask them to participate in other ways, it's better to be more nuanced about that. I can go into that in the longer form journey. Number 6 is one that I didn't experience until I moved to California. Particularly people who live in Big Sur seem to say a lot. I lived on Pine Ridge, the Pine Ridge Reservation, and they say it in a way where it's like if they studied with someone for 2 months, like it's equivalent to your entire life being Native. I think they're trying to connect, but it comes, and the intentions are genuine and good, but it comes across as kind of offensive. Almost like that Cherokee princess comment that somehow, well, your little experience equivocates to a lifetime of experience. I was adopted by X tribe. Sometimes that's okay. But you need to understand that adoption is made for many different reasons. I think a lot of people are adopted genuinely and they become relatives and they reciprocate, and that's a beautiful type of adoption, and tribes have the right to do that. But other times people are adopted kind of, most of the time, they're adopted kind of like as a pro forma act. So for example, if people in the tribe like you, or one person likes you, it's kind of like a shallow act. Maybe one example of it would be if the tribe adopted the non-native mayor of their city. It's really instrumental actually in order to get support from the mayor, and there's not really an adopted relative relationship. But people that are adopted in those instrumental ways, they basically they overblow it in their head and think it's more important than it is, and they kind of get a big ego about it. So that's what's problematic with that. My spirit animal is X. I may be wrong, but I don't know any religious beliefs with spirit animals. So, and it can come across as really offensive to people who don't grow up with that. It's really shallow. That's why. I was at Standing Rock. I know that was 2016, but a lot of times people go to these Native protests and events, and then they're talking to a Native person about it who's dealt with that their whole lives, and then they explain it to them. Again, that's just a big ego thing. And do you know names Native person from another state, tribe, region? I don't know people over in upstate New York besides Loretta. So just because we're here doesn't mean we all know each other. So I want to do a little exercise here. We want to work on transforming bias. So on the left-hand column here is a series of statements that I've heard time and time again in real life, working for tribes and Native organizations, where people well-meaning, well-intentioned come in to be an ally, but they come in with a lot of hubris and assumptions that Indigenous peoples don't know what's best for us. So one example of this is that we've heard is, I can show you how to do X. That is a really biased statement. Again, assuming that you know better. So instead, what if you came in and asked, what can I learn from this experience? Another one is, I have the best project for this community. Again, it's the bias of thinking you know better. And also a stereotype that Indigenous peoples don't know what they're doing. And maybe that's why they're impoverished, because they don't know what they're doing, or they're stupid. But really, this material situation they're in is because of ongoing settler colonization, and genocide, and structures of supremacy. So instead, what if you were to ask, what does the community need? So let's do a couple of these, and let's actually have people unmute yourself to answer. We'll take one answer per statement, and please make your answer be just one question or one sentence, because we did start quite a bit late and I want to get more content to you in this introduction. So I just want to help the poor people. What could you say instead to really show your intention? And just go ahead, whoever wants to respond, just unmute yourself and let us know.
Hi, I was thinking that maybe you could ask a question instead. So maybe we could like ask what we can do to be of service, like asking people who maybe have stated that they need help already, or just like figuring out where you feel like you're needed most, and then going there and asking like, is there anything I can do to help?
I'm going to cut you off because it's just supposed to be one sentence and we really will lose time. I'm not trying to be rude. This should really be 4 hours. Yeah, how can I be of service is absolutely beautiful. Or how can I help? Or what is needed?
Why are they
So much.
Why are they poor? Like asking a question about maybe why this situation unfolded to a degree. You wouldn't ask them directly, but to yourself rather before you approach.
Yeah, that's good. Just moving on to the next one. I can make this process so much more efficient. So efficiency is really a bias or an underlying assumption that's rooted in capitalism. This idea that you have to be so efficient so that you can get more done. So what could, just one sentence, what could you say instead of, or think instead of, I can make this process so much more efficient?
I think it's important to go into a place that you don't know and be quiet for a while so you can learn what their system is and how efficient it may be.
That's beautiful. And also in a lot of communities, we do things slowly on purpose. There's a reason for it. And then, Magali, sorry, I hope I said it right. Magali said, what would make this process more valuable? That's great. Really good. And then the last one is, I fixed this in this other community and I can bring it to your community. What could we say or think instead?
I have one comment. I think it's very much about interaction, how you actually communicate. Because typically it's a one-way dialogue, but it's very important to have it like in multiple different generations, different gender, et cetera, et cetera. So interaction at a in a way that you can understand and communicate.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the
Cultural
overall-
barriers that we tend to overlook and not understand.
Yeah. I wish, see, when we go into the longer learning journey, it's much more interactive when we can talk with each other more, because I love hearing from all of you. But yeah, this is just the assumption that you know what's best, and it's one-sided, exactly. And the main thing to underscore about this attitude is that you haven't taken the time to learn the particular context, the history, the culture, the language, worldviews of this new community. So how is whatever you quote unquote fixed going to necessarily fit into this new community? Sometimes it does, a lot of times it doesn't, and it takes time. So I'm going to offer a couple of ways to be an ally. Again, I'm not going to say bullet points, which I just said by not saying I'm not going to say it. Just a couple of ideas. Attend learning opportunities. Learn whose ancestral territories you're on. A helpful website for that is nativeland.ca. To educate others, things that you've learned over time. Breaking up institutional silence, making it easier for people who might feel unsafe to speak. Calling out bad practices when you see it. Calling out cultural appropriation. Try and create opportunities for Indigenous inclusion. So I named that earlier when I talked about staff members, boards of directors. If you're working on a community project. Land acknowledgements. Get political, vote, run for office, support other candidates. And this is a really maybe most important one, is ask what's needed for help. Don't just assume that you know. So I want to move into another interactive thought experiment here. And I understand land acknowledgements are they're different. They're mostly happening in what's called the United States and Canada. But, and if you haven't heard of it, this is the idea: if you are settler, descendant of a settler in a place that's been settler colonized, this idea of acknowledging whose ancestral territories you're on. So go ahead and go in the Menti and share some of your ideas about what should be included in a land acknowledgement. Or if you're not a Mentimeter, in the chat. I should say also, because we have a lot of folks who aren't in the on the North American continent, I would like to hear from you. If you have no idea or you're not sure, let us know that too, because that's really important feedback for us. And again, the Mentimeter is all anonymous, so we won't know it's you. So we have, I'll try and read this one out. So we have one not sure, we have one share common values, show some action, learning initiatives with local people. So it's an action and not a concept. Well, just by, let's see, let's go into the, in the toolbar for Zoom, where it has the 3 dots and it says more. If you click on that, that will have a drop-down menu. And the third thing down on that drop-down menu is reactions or raise hand. Let's do raise hand. How many of you have been present to hear a land acknowledgement? Okay, let's see. So we got 4 hands so far. Ra, you should raise your hand.
I'm not good at the Zoom reaction.
Oh, man. Just go to more and then drop down below reactions. The 4th choice is raise or lower hand. Okay, so less than half the people. So I'm going to assume that even if you've heard one, a lot of folks are probably unsure about what a land acknowledgement entails. And a lot, they've only, actually in our Native communities, we've been doing them always. When we are visiting someone else, when we're at an event or a ceremony, we always know and say whose land we're on. But this is something that's trickled out to the non-Native community, in part by calls from Native people who have said, you know, you have to acknowledge you're on our land, it's stolen land. And it's been going on for a while, but now the sentiment towards land acknowledgements, now that more and more people are doing it, is that it's just performative. It's just a performative act that doesn't really have any change connected to it. So if you haven't seen Ra's comment in the chat, he really hit the nail on the head with that. So to me, and this is just my opinion, and I've talked this through a lot of people, a land acknowledgement should include the proper name of the peoples whose land you're on. Sometimes people say that you should have a local Indigenous person do the land acknowledgement. If they're on their territories, you could, but let's say you're in a city like Monterey, those leaders are overburdened and overtaxed. So it's probably better to do it yourself. Whose land you're on, the people, the name of the land in their language. I think you should acknowledge the privilege you have to live on that land, and acknowledge that it did come through genocide. And then what is the action that you're going to take? What is your commitment to support these peoples? Otherwise, if you just say, I'm on the land of the Rumsen Ohlone, or we're on the land of the Rumsen Ohlone, and just move on with your event there, it's just shallow. And I even now recommend that with any organization, if they're going to do a land acknowledgement, they have to go through some kind of training to understand the gravitas and the meaning of that and figure out what their continued actions are going to be. Oops. We saw another response. I'm curious as to how this could be explored in Europe and where equally original inhabitants were displaced, harmed, killed, and where we have a moment now to remember and reclaim our ancestral cultures. I am curious about the exact same thing. I've been thinking about it a lot, and I would love to have this discussion as a group, to figure it out together. I'm very curious about the same thing. Thank you for putting that in the Mentimeter.
And I just want to add that we are currently right now in the fountain working with how to work with the youth, both the original people in the Baltic countries, as well as Iceland and Greenland, bringing the European youth together with them in order to come to this same kind of dialogue.
Thank you so much for adding that. And I just want to let Lila know that her hand is still up. Not that it matters, but I just thought I'd let you know. So now back in the Mentimeter or in the chat, can you think of other ways to be an ally? So this is what we had. You can repeat those too if you forgot what I shared. But what are some ways, other ways to be an ally?
I feel like maybe you can like check in with people more. I think you put that on your original slide, but maybe just like checking in with people and just making sure that like they're okay. Which sounds like really simple.
Thank you for that, but let's just put it in the Mentimeter in chat, because if we
Oh,
start
okay.
discussing, it's going to turn into 10 minutes.
My bad, sorry.
It's all good. Thank you for that, though. So we have contributions to local tribal language programs. It's wonderful. Ross said saving seeds. Volunteering to cook at events. That's a great way to be an ally and to build those relationships from the ground up. Working on subconscious beliefs around race. That's like really, really important inner work that you have to do to be a good ally. Standing in allyship around shared and agreed priorities. Yeah, the agreed is a really important word there. Deepening relations, supporting youth. One of the things that I've done that's been pretty cool, working with urban Indian youth in the San Francisco area, is trying to get them to access to places they wouldn't have access to think about different directions that they might want to go in their career, in tech and other industries. I couldn't have imagined as a young person that I'd be anywhere where I am or doing today. I didn't have any role models. I didn't have any examples. I didn't know how to access that stuff. I didn't have the cultural capital. So I've been really helping these youth get these backstage passes to different organizations that they wouldn't be able to access. I've been talking to a bunch of tech companies, HR departments, telling them about how wrong they are and how they're missing out because of their stringent requirements for internships and things like that. Hosting events for raising awareness, amazing. Decolonize systems in workplaces, yes. And I would love to I probably will do a whole section in the long journey all about that, because I've actually been working on that practically for like 15 years or more. And I really love that concept. So we'll give it like 30 more seconds if anybody wants to add something in the chat or in the Mentimeter. We got another one come in. helping people to reflect on their behavior, self-awareness of unconscious bias. Absolutely. And it is a muscle you have to stretch over time. And I find that giving your own personal examples, being vulnerable with other people, helps them to feel brave enough to reflect on themselves and kind of forgive themselves for things that they didn't understand that they were thinking or doing. We do have to have, in addition to humility, some self-forgiveness and kindness with ourselves going through this work. So what's not allyship with Indigenous peoples? I already mentioned this: speaking for others, taking up too much space. You'd be surprised. This second point here, copying Indigenous ways like patterns of speech. Somebody will go into a community and have a transformative experience for 2 months, and then they start talking all native. And it's just like so embarrassing and offensive. That's not allyship. Interfering between communities. If you are coming in to support a project or be an ally to a community that you don't know the history between that community and other nearby communities, and you should not interfere in any way. Maybe better to do what Grandma Jyoti said, and sit back and observe for a very long time before you ally. Because if you did sit back and observe and learn for a very, very long time, maybe even years, you wouldn't do these top 3 things. Causing emotional labor. This is what we call white tears in the US. You learn about something for the first time that we've been dealing with our whole life. You're in, let's say, a group setting, addressing a local issue, and you get so upset, you start bawling or crying. I've seen it happen so many times. That puts the attention on you. It's you taking up too much space. But that doesn't, you'll have to work it out on your own. Try to control yourself and pull it in. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't cry. Do it, just not taking up space. And it also doesn't mean you can't get or seek emotional support. You absolutely can, from friends in the community, people you're working with. Just don't do it in a way that causes emotional labor at an inappropriate time and place. And then making promises you can't keep. A lot of people, when they come to a community or have a project they want to ally on, they get so excited and they're so fired up, and they make all these extravagant promises that will take years to enact. And then after a while, they get kind of exhausted because the work is hard, and they pull out. And so now they've made a bunch of promises they can't keep. And then it makes these community members feel even much more reluctant to ally with someone from the outside, because they've seen it happen time and time and time again. So some signs you're approaching allyship well are community members like giving you the time, like you actually get to know each other and make a relationship. When people make fun of you, I gave a version of this talk, I don't know, like 5 or 6 years ago. And when I went to Q&A, a guy in the audience, he came and talked to me afterwards. He had a question. He was volunteering in an Indigenous community in the Amazon, and he spent a lot of time there. He was very sincere, and he said that they were always making fun of him and calling him names, and he was really genuinely upset. And he was like, "What's wrong with my allyship?" And I was like, "What's right with your allyship?" When you're being made fun of, that's a sign of being trusted and accepted in many Indigenous communities. People in your age range or your same sex spend time with you. If you are a 24-year-old woman trying to do allyship work on an issue in a community, and the only people you're hanging out with are 64-year-old men, something's probably going funky. So people in your age, your sex, that's a good sign. Community members call you a relative, like auntie or sis. People don't complain too much when you pitch in. The reason I wrote it this way is because there's always going to be a grumbler, but if most people are okay with you, you're probably doing a good job. And just keep in mind that there's always going to be a grumbler. Like, you cannot please all the people all the time. And then, of course, this is related to building long-term relationships and getting to know each other. When people confide in you, it means you're doing a good job. Signs your allyship is not quite right. This one, top one, an overzealous community leader in partnership. So if you don't know the culture or the language, haven't spent a lot of time, you're new to a place. I've seen this happen a lot. Sometimes somebody wanting to be an ally will come in, and then there'll be some very authentic looking community person who's totally on board and totally excited about partnering in every different way. Usually, if they're too excited too fast, what I've noticed is they're usually kind of an outcast in their own community. And maybe their ego is getting stroked by jumping onto some newcomer's bandwagon. So you have to watch out for that. It takes time to make those relationships. Being adopted, taken in, given a name or an honorific too soon, and you have to determine for yourself or ask some culture bearers or what too soon means. But if you're there for a week and somebody says, I'm going to adopt you into my clan or tribe, that's too soon. Being told that you should have babies with locals. If dangerous things happen, like if you see firearms or drugs and alcohol, I've seen all these things pop up time and time again. That's kind of a no-brainer, but sometimes you don't notice it's happening or you ignore it because you're so excited about the other work you're doing. Keep an eye out for dangerous things. If somebody wants to harm you, definitely a bad sign. I have funny stories about all these, but this is an overview, so we don't have much time. Being given a profound religious experience for nothing. I mentioned this earlier. You got to put in the time and the work and build the relationships and be in there. You can't just pop in and pop out like a tourist. And you might even think it's profound, but what I know from speaking to a lot of religious leaders, some people don't like the word shaman, but a lot of people use it, is that they mix up their ceremonies to commoditize them for tourism. And so the visitors think it's like the most profound, authentic religious experience, but actually they change it up because you really have to spend the time to get the real spiritual experience. And then tribal leaders you collaborate with are not in their home territory. That's kind of related to the top one, an overzealous community leader. They have to be in their own tribal territory. If it's somebody from another neighboring tribe or down the way, that's not a good sign for your allyship because you will anger the people whose territory it really is. Then I want to stop pretty soon here to, I'm going to cut it off so we can get to some Q&A, and I want to hand it back to Ra. But I also want to talk about the art of the apology. You'll probably make a mistake at some point. Somebody might yell at you or get mad at you, or something could be brought to your attention where your allyship wasn't quite right. A good thing to do is just be humble and apologize. So here's a story with Pioneers where I co-direct the Indigeneity program. Some people on the team thought it would be great for our 30-year anniversary to make a commemorative t-shirt. So we brought in our friend Jared Yazi. He's Dene, and he has a clothing design company called OXDX. And we asked him if he could design this t-shirt. So he consulted with a friend of his who is Ohlone in the San Francisco area. And he came up with this design for the Ramaytush Ohlone. It's their territory. And I thought it was beautiful because people at the time, it's getting better now, but not so much. They didn't know when they were in San Francisco that it's Ramaytush land and that it's their Ohlone peoples and this is their territory. So I thought it was pretty cool. And then I got a buzz from a friend of mine, and she said, did you talk to the chairman of the Ramaytush Ohlone? And I said, no, I don't even know him, but I thought we were cleared with free, prior, and informed consent. Getting me back to that point I made earlier, because the designer spoke with a couple of Ohlone friends in San Francisco. And so then I asked her, I said, well, let me get a hold of him. Can you give me his phone number or email? So I emailed him and I said, we were doing this fundraiser. We had Jared design this. He consulted with somebody. I don't even know who. Is this okay? And then he wrote me back and he had a whole litany. He was like, we didn't braid our hair like that. The the poof on the top of the head is wrong. It's not the correct regalia. We didn't do, he was like, this is so badly researched and so badly done. It doesn't depict us. And then it was like 2 weeks before we were about to drop the shirts. And I thought about it for a while and I was like, I'm just going to swear. I was like, holy fuck, I was so wrong. I did such a bad job. I should know way better than this. So I just wrote him back, Jonathan, and I said, let me just, express my sincerest apologies. You're absolutely right. The process was completely wrong. We should have consulted in the beginning. If you never want to talk to me, that's fine. But and then I listed a bunch of other ways that I got it wrong. And I was like, I'm really, really sorry. I'll never do this again. We're pulling the shirts. Nobody will ever see them. I'll destroy them all, whatever you want me to do. And I said, if I don't expect you to accept my apology, but if you do, I would love to just chat on the phone for 15 minutes or so, just to express it verbally, because email is so insincere. And he said, thank you so much. People do this to our tribe all the time. And nobody's ever apologized to me before. That was profound, that he thanked me when I felt so bad for myself. And he said, yeah, I'll have a phone call with you. So we made time to get a phone call, and I decided I was going to hike up the canyon behind my house while we were chatting. And it was supposed to be 15 minutes. It turned into almost 2 hours. And now we are very good friends, and we invite each other to different events. He's like hooked me up with a bunch of keynote speeches. I try to bring him to events to support the work that I'm always trying to support the work that the Ramaytush are doing in San Francisco with land back, with land acknowledgements, with traditional ecological knowledge. We're like really good friends now. And it all started with me messing up and giving an apology. So it's really good to do that and learn how to do it. So I'm going to probably end here. Since you are probably going to make some kind of a mistake at some point, it's really important to deal with your own inner self and your own feelings, so that you're not operating from that position of guilt, but responsibility. So these are just some suggestions for what I call a discomfort plan. When you start to feel tight, when you get uncomfortable, when you do make the mistake like I make, how do you deal with that emotionally so that you can move forward in a good way? So one thing is, if somebody attacks you, focus on individuals as unique and complex. Like I said, I can only speak for myself. I don't represent everybody. So not as a representative of a group. Allow yourself to notice difference. We want to honor each person's unique identity. I've already talked a lot about this. Be humble, be vulnerable. Like I said, things always, when we're vulnerable with each other, we don't have a mask on. It helps us feel connected to each other. And also curiosity. Apologize. I just went through that. Work hard. Do the work you need to do to try to remember, so that you don't make the same mistakes over and over. I've seen this happen a lot with folks working in Indigenous communities. They're told what mistake they made, and you'd think it would be a no-brainer, but they make the same mistakes over and over and over again. So that's where this self-reflection is really important. And just accept that there's a lot that you don't know. Adopt a growth mindset. So if you've not heard of a growth or a fixed mindset before, it comes from a psychologist out of Stanford called her name is Carol Dweck. And fixed mindset is just the idea that you're stuck where you're at. That you turned 18 and supposedly that made you an adult, and you're done and you're formed. A growth mindset is this idea of being open-minded, elastic, using challenges as an opportunity to grow and do things better, as opposed to something stopping you and sticking you in the same rut you're in. So I'm just going to scoot over to some of the topics that will be covered in this learning journey. Why indigenize, decolonizing the mind, colonization and decolonization, culture, ethics, and the law. I'll be digging into legal issues and also cultural appropriation there. Indigenous ways of knowing, Indigenous science, more ways to be a good relative, and then how do you take your good intentions and turn it into positive action? And I'm also thinking maybe, depending on the group, that I'll do some work around organizational decolonization and quadruple bottom lines for business, and what we can learn from Indigenous businesses and corporations. I've worked for them and I've done a lot of work studying them. So I think I do want to get to Ross. So let's do about 10 minutes of Q&A, and then I will pass it back on to him. Also, I guess I should talk a little bit about the structure of the learning journey that I lead. I have a mindfulness person that I bring in at the beginning and sometimes throughout, because some of the topics that we talk about are very, very difficult to process if you're hearing them for the first time. So I like to work with her to keep us grounded. And then I also integrate it with talking circles, again, to process what you've learned in each session. I find that very helpful. So that's the structure. And also it'll be more interactive, more discussion, less me talking at you like today. So yeah, I'll take some questions now. You can write them in the chat or just unmute yourself, but I do ask that you keep it to like a 1-sentence question so I can get as many as possible. And no question is embarrassing or stupid. Oh, could we stop recording for the questions though, please?
Thank you so much, Alexis, for sharing. Just that primer alone is pretty powerful. So appreciate that. So we have about 15 minutes left. So I just wanted to kind of come in and share a little bit about the intertwinings of what we're doing, but we're coming at it from a similar but different lens. So as much as this decolonial work, as Alexis is addressing, is focused on the actual people from the various different lands, Rebiz in itself is more focused on utilizing and learning how to function from natural law in a degree of how to structure the businesses in accordance with the bioregional places. So decolonial understanding is extremely important in this, because right now, the system that we are operating within, which can be called late stage capitalism or neoliberal globalization, is structured on monocultured, homogeneous spread of commodification of nature and people. So in order to kind of utilize and understand the decolonial journey in the respect of also decolonizing our relationship with nature, these go hand in hand. And Rebiz is more along the lines of how do we begin to tap into these kind of intersectional understandings of our own grief, for example, which when Alexis showed the stages of the emotions around genocide, those are very similar to the emotions around grief. And the interesting part is that we can witness these functioning at a systemic level, like within climate denial, for example. Denial was one of those stages. Bargaining is one of the ones of grief documented by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, which is what we could call green growth, or the continual desire to exponentially grow, or plaster ESG on this, or label this as sustainability when it's not. So even greenwashing is an example of bargaining, which is a manifestation of grief. So a lot of these understandings that we'll touch into with Rebiz are very complementary and work alongside the decolonial re-indigenize work that Alexis is doing, but kind of focused at it from a different angle, but very, very much aligned. And some of you may have seen the comment that I placed in the chat earlier about the word bullets coming up. And one of the chapters that we focus on in Rebiz is language, because the way that we're talking and the way that business is framed even is based upon a war terminology. So like businesses are based upon exit strategies. So relationships don't operate like that, you know. Only transactions. Right now, transactions are essentially being manipulated, or relationships are being manipulated to actually assist in transactions versus the other way around. So people are becoming commoditized and turned into transactions themselves. And I mean, the thing with the language, we can go too deep into it, but even the way that we're thinking about and operating within business in this dual space of human and nature, or trying to attain our purpose like it's out here, or business and planet, civilization and the economy and the natural world, all of the way that we're positioning things within our language is creating a continual separation from what we really are. And so Rebiz really looks at this from a very cross sort of intersectional model within the first few weeks, and then flows into, well, now that we're beginning to look in this, how do we understand what is truly regeneration, not regeneration washing, which is now even happening with companies like Nestle. Nestle is claiming that they're regenerative, for example. How can that be the case when they're one of their biggest products is the privatization of water, which is a human right? So a lot of these frameworks within the actual incentive shifts, within the bioregional approaches, within the reclamation of human and nature in a non-dual or a non-binary space is really important, and fits right alongside the actual decolonial understandings of how to step into right relationship, not right transaction. And relationships are not immediate. And the continual efficiency and the growth model itself is counterproductive and counterintuitive to the natural world which operates within limits. So part of this whole understanding, and some of you may have heard of donut economics as well. The donut economics shifted the economic model from a linear GDP model into a circle, since nothing in nature is really linear. Yet, even our view of time is linear, and we get into our understandings of time as well, between time as an arrow or time as a lake, as Robin Wall Kimmerer talks about, and how even the view of our year with 7-day cycles for weeks, and the months named after Roman emperors from thousands of years ago, and the fact that we're in the year 2023, just because Jesus was born in the year 0. I mean, the whole understanding of time is part of one of the core disconnects of why we're out of sync with natural law, because we're not in sync with natural time. So in order to build these systems that are a part of nature, not apart from them, we need to remember ourselves back into these ways of life, not from a conceptual level, kind of like Alexis was saying with the land acknowledgement, because a lot of us know that we are a part of nature. This is something that's really commonly talked about. Is like, I hear a lot of people always say, well, yeah, I get it, like we're nature. And then they go and operate in a way that's counterintuitive to the way that nature functions. So it's not really a concept. It's not a lifestyle. It's a life way. And these are really different ways of functioning and operating. So I think if I can position it this way as well, the Rebiz, I know Alexis said she was going to add in some decolonial organizational parts into her journey, but Rebiz really functions on like sort of the core levers and logic within the way that economics and capitalism and business functions, so that we can tweak the models into a kinship worldview, which is where everything is always in relation with one another at all points. And I wanted to add this when Alexis was talking, but I didn't, because I understood I could add a little bit later. But one of my favorite things that I learned from one of my Lakota uncles, his name's Tiokasin Ghost Horse. He shared this with me. He shared that him and I were talking, and there's a phrase in Lakota that's known in English as "to all my relatives, to all my relations," and we were talking about Einstein, and he said, everyone really thought Einstein was such a genius, but his theory of relativity, like we knew that already for tens of thousands of years, like we're all relatives. So the theory of relativity in itself is just showing the quantum entanglement that we're all in now, which is rooted in these understandings that Alexis is bringing about, which is why it's so important to decolonize or re-indigenize the way we're thinking, because it brings us back into alignment and attunement with everything that we're interconnected with from the first place, that we've somehow been dismembered from, which I think is another really valuable point that I've noticed within my journey, is that forgetting is not the opposite of remembering. Dismembering is the opposite of remembering. Like, it's not a mental concept that we have to just poof, remember our way back into something. It's an active, effortful engagement where probably if and when you come through these journeys, you'll just be beginning in these journeys, right? Like a lot of the things that I've noticed is that sometimes people have left the Rebiz course and they're like, I feel like I'm starting now, actually, because these are not meant to be an end destination in themselves, the courses. They're meant to align us in a way to continually have the path that we're all walking together on our shared home and our shared mother, align us back into these so that we can walk in that way for the rest of our lives, and then simultaneously touch other people in our journeys who are doing that as well. So we can plant these seeds around the world. And then when we be able to practice planting them and they grow into something, then we get to actually share the seeds, So I just want to kind of say about that much. I know I have 5 minutes left, but wanted to leave it open, and it would be very difficult for me to squeeze everything into this time, but I just want to say thank you too. And also just highlight the complementarity of the decolonial journey with the return to natural ways of living, because they're one and the same. And right now our sacred economies, which is the Fountain's mission, is aligned with sacred and commodification are essentially on opposite sides of a continuum. And to move your way back into sacredness is to move our way out of transaction and commodification and the valuing of values, because it's really impossible to value something that we are made of and that we would not be able to live without. Like water doesn't have a value. It's invaluable. It is literally life itself. So even the way that we're approaching ESG and ecosystem services, and they're even putting pricing now on whales, like, because they contribute to carbon sequestration and tourism dollars. It's like that whale does not have a price like that, So the way that we're coming about arriving at our ways of critical thinking through a certain lens is really, really important in the way that we're going to merge the systems with nature so that they function as a part of it, emergent within it in these different bioregional locales, rather than as this more of a viral entity, which is kind of happening now. So thanks for having me share a little bit too. And yeah.
Thank you, Ra. Thank you, Alexis. What a full cup we walk away with. And I know that Margine has put over in the chat the links that you must follow. I want to encourage you, while your fire is lit, to go register in the way that your heart calls you to do. As they've explained to you, they have standalone with Rebiz, then there's Alexis's training of 2 months, or you can put them all together, or you can get in one and decide you need the other. We've tried to create a model that allows your own empowerment in your learning process. I hope we've accomplished that. And if you have questions on the website, Ra has his email address there. Please reach out. We want this very much to be a participatory learning process, and we're all involved in the same learning. We're bringing very many different kinds of knowledges to our table, but we're all coming, it feels like, with the same intent, and that's to open ourselves, to unify ourselves once again through our learning and unlearning of some things that have kept us in a box for way too long. So with that thought in mind, I just want to do a big shout out and thank you again, Alexis and Ra, for the big work that you've done. Margine has been a major part of your team in helping us get all of this set up so that people can access things easily and participate in a strong and good way. If this is an interest to you, join us. If you feel like you need to pass it on, pass it on. Let it flow far and wide. As I mentioned, as we opened, this is a significant moment of choice we're in, and the earth herself is bringing to the table at least a choice that might help you on that journey. Have a blessed, blessed day. Thank you, one and all. Hope to see you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye,
Take care.
thanks.